First and Second Samuel are beautiful books that leave the reader with various ways to encounter God. I start off like that because as you read these books, you will quickly see real people encountering a real God and the result of those interactions. First and Second Samuel are a history of Israel's first earthly kings. It's believed that these books were compiled by Samuel and possibly a few other prophets over a long period of time, and they were written to give the nation of Israel an account of how their kingdom was started. I mentioned earthly kings because, in my opinion, Israel as a nation was always supposed to be set apart and holy, having God as their king. These books walk through time with Samuel establishing the kingdom in Israel, and Saul, the first king that let pride take over his heart and eventually lead to his death, and then David, the man after God's own heart, the great king. A major chapter in these two books is found in 2 Samuel 7, when we see the covenant God establishes with David and his family. I don't want to diminish or minimize this chapter at all. Some scholars would go as far to say this chapter is the hinge point for the entire Old Testament. It's here we see God promise David such things as a great name, rest for his people, a place for the people of Israel to establish their home, and a house which will one day be the temple for the presence of God to rest in. And probably the most important, offspring that will always be on the throne from David. God says to David in 2 Samuel 7, "My steadfast love will not depart from you." The best part about this chapter is the fulfillment of this covenant unfolding with Jesus the Messiah, the anointed one, Son of God, that comes onto the scene in Jerusalem. Jesus came to fulfill this covenant as the perfect King, the spotless Lamb that died the death that we deserve to save us from our sins. Once again, 1 and 2 Samuel leave the reader with various ways to encounter God. It's in these very familiar stories that I think each one of us can see ourselves in how we interact with God in our own lives. We see Samuel, a faithful man, a man of prayer, a man that was dedicated to hearing God's voice and doing what he says. We see Saul letting pride come into his heart. How often do we as believers let pride take over our daily lives? And we see David, a faithful man, but yet not a perfect man at all. He had his flaws just like we all do, but he believed in God, he trusted him, and he had faith like no other. These books leave you with a wonderful history of Israel and the lives that impacted them.